You should know by now that defense wins championships not only in the NFL, but also in fantasy football as well. And since we're getting close to the start of the 2025 season, I'm going through my top 12 defense rankings for 2025 fantasy football. Just make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So again, before we get into this, if you have not seen my running back and wide receiver rankings, we are making a brand change here at Football Fantasy Network. We are no longer FFN. We are now Fantasy Football Roundup over here. And I want to highlight this again because it's very important that you guys know that nobody has bought off this company. I still own Fantasy Football Roundup, just like I own Football Fantasy Network, which means that nobody is in control of my messaging, how I talk, and what I talk about. You're still getting fantasy football content straight to your faces, and everything that is coming is going to be even bigger than a name change, guys. What we have coming, I've been working on all offseason, and that's all I can tell you right now. Just make sure to stay tuned because this has never been brought to the fantasy football space. And I'm so excited to bring it to you guys. So now that we've got it out of the way, let's get into our top 12. Starting out with our first tier, the Texans at number 1. Now, the good thing about the Texans defense is that really it starts with a foundation of young, aggressive players led by DeMeco Ryans at the head coaching position. And with DeMeco Ryans being a great former linebacker in the NFL, this is just a defense that I trust to move forward and continue to develop, unlike I would trust it with any other defensive coordinator. The other good thing is they have lots of continuity heading into 2025. The only issue that they've got right now that I can see is that Fadakazi, their defensive tackle, has kind of an undisclosed injury as far as I can see, and he's not practicing right now in training camp. But this is a team also with Will Anderson at the edge rusher position, who I believe has a big season that is loading up for 2025 to take the step forward, to make them grow on sacks and to grow on turnovers, which they were already strong at doing at last year. So to me personally, I think the Texans take the step up. They're an elite defense in 2025. And the number 2, the Denver Broncos defense is the number 1 defense last year in fantasy football. And I like them a lot, again. Like, they're at number 2 just because I believe the Texans will grow, and they're just a younger, more athletic, and explosive defense. But the Broncos defense, the only issue they have is that Alex Singleton, their tackle machine inside at the linebacker position, he tore his ACL last year. Now, as far as we're getting, the ACL is actually not the problem. He broke his thumb just a couple days ago in one of the training camp practices. So that's the only issue right now. But as far as I'm looking at, he should be good for the start of the actual 2025 NFL season, which means that he'll be contributing on their fantasy football defense. And they led the NFL in sacks in 2025 by 9 sacks. They had over 60 total sacks. And of course, if you don't know how fantasy football defense is scored, it's always in the big boom plays. Sacks, turnovers of any kind, whether it's fumble or interception, and forced fumbles, even if they don't recover. This was an aggressive defense last year. And add on top of the fact that they added Talanoa Ufunga and Dre Greenlaw from the San Francisco 49ers. 2 players that, when they're healthy, are all pro talents. I'm not joking. The problem with those 2 has been health. And then they went and grabbed Jahdae Barron as a nickel corner in the first round out of the University of Texas in 2025. They're making moves. They just signed Pat Surtain to a big extension at corner. They want to be a great defense and set the tone by punching you in the mouth. They're going to do that again in 2025. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got the Ravens defense at number 3 still. The last time I did these rankings, I had them here. Had some pushback on if they were too low or too high. I think a lot of people see what's coming, though, and that means that they're too low in some people's eyes. This is a defense that's very similar to the Houston Texans. Young, aggressive, with a good defensive coordinator who I'll get to here in a little bit with Zach Orr. But again, lots of continuity on this roster. Like, they added Jair Alexander to the cornerback position in 2025 offseason, which I don't particularly view as some massive signing or anything like that. But it does add some depth and a playmaker who is older, kind of like the Jalen Ramsey signing for the Steelers. But also, I think that they're not going to put Jair Alexander in big situations on opposing number 1s. I think he'll play a little bit of a nickel role, or maybe they'll even play him at safety just a little bit. But the bottom line is here, the moment that they made the switch last year to Kyle Hamilton more of a deep safety, everything changed. And that defense became excellent in fantasy. They were the second in the NFL in sacks, only behind the Denver Broncos, who we just went over. And really, I think that was just part of Zach Orr's growth as a first-year defensive coordinator. Former player, very young defensive coordinator. I think that was just part of his growth, was figuring out, last year we didn't have the personnel for Kyle Hamilton to just be all over the place, kind of like a Troy Polamalu. This year, they kind of set it up like that when they drafted Starks in the first round. And the only reason the Ravens are not higher on my list is because they have a tougher schedule, being that they're the division winner and they're one of the best teams in the NFL. So that's the only reason, but as far as I'm concerned, talent is off the charts, and they will be good in fantasy. Number 4, the Vikings defense to me is going to be an interesting one to watch because last year they were excellent in fantasy football. It's not going to be like last year quite as much. There's new faces on that defense right here. They just had to make some business decisions because a lot of those guys were going to cost a lot of money, which they did when they hit the open market. Patrick Jones, Cam Bynum at safety, those are just a couple guys, but they lost more face than that and kind of got discounts at those positions to fill the holes in the offseason. They still have Brian Flores as their defensive coordinator, which to me is the glue. That's all that really matters here, and that's the reason they're staying inside the top 5 is because there's such an aggressive defense with Brian Flores. They led the league in interceptions last year. Now, again, I think Cam Bynum losing him will end up affecting them a little bit, but the Vikings defense, I think there's still enough talent, and with Brian Flores there, again, that's really the piece that matters here, so I'm going to stick with them at number 4. And the Rams defense at number 5. The Rams defense also will be a very interesting watch this year to me as well. Because when I look at the Rams defense, they kind of remind me of more of a watered down version of the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans in the sense that there's continuity and it's a young, aggressive defense, mostly on rookie contracts, led by Jared Verse. Now, Jared Verse is the guy that I'm particularly planting the flag on because if you look at their sack numbers last year, they weren't all that impressive. But Jared Verse was still coming on as a rookie, and he showed a lot as a rookie. I believe he's one of the leading sack masters in the NFL this year, leading them to just a better defensive performance in fantasy this year. So I'm making the leap with the Rams in 2025. That's why I've got them at 5. And the Cardinals also taking a big leap at number 6 as well. Now, the Cardinals, the difference between them and the Rams is they pretty much had a strong defense for the majority of 2024. The Rams came on a little slow at first and then really gained ground as the back half of the season. The Cardinals always were kind of really good. They were tied for 5th in the league in forced fumbles. They were very aggressive. And the good thing is they didn't settle on their morals this year. Like, they went out in the NFL draft and went all defense in the 2025 NFL draft. They invested heavy in it. So with their head coach being a defense-first guy, already made their defense look really good last year. I see more of the same in 2025, just with better, younger, athletic faces at some key positions that they drafted. Walter Nolan, their first-round defensive tackle, he is nursing a calf injury, which could become an issue if that, persists into the season. But with their favorable schedule in 2025, and if he can make it back in time, I think the Cardinals are overall a really good defense in 2025 fantasy football. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got the Seahawks defense at 7. And listen, this is just an NFC West thing for me. I think the NFC West is full of really good defenses. I mean, last year they were one of the lowest scoring, divisions from a points perspective whenever they all played each other. That's because they all had good defenses. The Seahawks are super aggressive. They're led by Mike McDonald as head coach. That guy knows how to coach a defense, and he's got the personnel for it. They had 13 interceptions, 14 forced fumbles last year, and they were a top 10 defense already in fantasy football. They grabbed DeMarcus Lawrence at free agency, which, again, to me is more of like a Jair Alexander signing, more of a Joey Bosa signing, more of a Jalen Ramsey trade. For me, it's like the guy's probably past his prime. But at the bottom line is if they can get a flash-in-the-pan season from DeMarcus Lawrence like we haven't seen from him really in a couple years, this could be a game changer because their front seven is already extremely strong. They've got a lot of good pass rushers and guys that just stop the run as well. They had 45 sacks last year. So the Seahawks, I don't think there's going to be tons of progression moving forward, but there won't be any regression either. I think they'll kind of hold water where they were last year, which is at that 7th spot, which isn't a bad thing. I just don't think they're going to grow too much. And the Eagles at number 8 to round out this tier. Now, with the Eagles defense, I get this all the time. Every time I do these rankings, listen, it's not a slight to the Eagles defense. Grow up. Like, some of the Eagles fans in the comment section really get after my case. They're a great NFL defense. But do you understand the difference between NFL defense and fantasy football defense? Because it's not the same thing. Let's just get it all out there and get on the same page, because it's actually ridiculous if you want to know the truth. The Eagles defense had several key losses this year, also in addition to not being a great fantasy defense last year, even with a lighter schedule, which we'll get into in a minute. They lost Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Milton Williams on the defensive line, Isaiah Rodgers. Like, they lost a lot of players, man. And I will give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's the benefit of drafting so freaking well like the Eagles do. They're able to have young studs ready to fill those holes. It's not really going to be a huge problem. The big problem will be the schedule's a lot tougher as well. Obviously, they won the Super Bowl. They're going to play a lot tougher teams. And listen, I'm not doubting the Eagles' defense. Like, they're a great defense filled with plenty of talent. The problem is that fantasy football defense doesn't equal NFL defense, meaning I have a great NFL defense with the Eagles. They're not the greatest defense in fantasy. That's how they were in 2024. Just look at the numbers, and that's how they'll probably be again in 2025. Now, dropping down to our last tier, I've got the Patriots defense at number 9. I actually made an executive decision and moved them up a couple spots over, several defenses in this rankings that I did in the early part of June. The Patriots defense is completely revamped. Like, everything about this team, not just the defense, is different. Mike Vrabel comes in as head coach, whips that team right into shape. That's what's going to happen here. They get Milton Williams again from the Eagles to boost the pass rush and to boost the run stoppage in the middle of that defensive line. And then you got a secondary led by Christian Gonzalez, who is going through an injury right now, but as far as I know, he should be ready for week 1. This team's schedule, though, is really where I'm looking at. In their first month, they play the Las Vegas Raiders, the Miami Dolphins, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Carolina Panthers. Name me a high-flying offense in there. Miami, in theory, I guess, could be, but the way they've looked the past several years, not big on them. So I think the Patriots defense is going to be so much better in fantasy this year. The Bears defense is at number 10. Now, the Bears defense also jumped up, and this is purely because I love their talent. Like, their depth chart on defense was already really strong before Ben Johnson came on. They had a strong defense, and they were actually great in fantasy until the Tyreek Stevenson meltdown that happened against the Washington Commanders. And by the way, he's a really good player. Like, Bears fans calling for him to get axed is not a good thing. He's a really good player. And I just think that coaching matters a lot. And we saw that last year. Ben Johnson, I think, helps clean up not just the defense, but the team, because he's a more disciplined and he comes from a winning culture with Detroit. So I think he delegates this defense to the defensive coordinator. Now, the only problem I have with the Bears is it's not an easy schedule. They actually have a more difficult schedule this year than they did last year. This is purely just a belief in the Bears' talent on defense. That's why the Bears' defense is at number 10. The 49ers defense at 11, they made the list this time, did not make the top 12 for me in my last rankings. And really the major changes here was a lot of things. Like, I can't even nail one down, but the big thing that matters to me is Robert Saleh, who we'll go into here in a little bit. They lost Talanoa Ufanga, Dre Greenlaw to the Denver Broncos. They lost Malik Collins, Leonard Floyd, Charvarius Ward, among other players. Like, this is a different looking defense in 2025 than it was in 2024 when they had lots more talent. But again, the big thing here is that Robert Saleh is the defensive coordinator for this team again. And if you don't remember, he was several years back before he became the Jets head coach, and they were really dominant on defense. Nick Bosa commented on him recently saying that, yeah, we needed a big alpha presence back in the locker room, which we did not have last year with Sorensen. So to me, it's like, I don't see how this doesn't work, especially when you add on top of the fact that they have a very favorable schedule in 2025. That's why they moved into the top 12 for me. 49ers defense back inside the top 12, rounding out the whole NFC West. And then at number 12, the Bills defense. I always get flack for this because everyone's like, well, they look worse this year. Their personnel is not outstanding. Guys, the Bills defense is always top 12. Like, this is kind of in that death and taxes category where you can kind of count on it, right? Because the Bills defense has been top 10 in fantasy the last 6 seasons. All of the last 6 seasons, they've been a top 10 defense in fantasy. This is just something you need to trust to continue to move forward with because Sean McDermott, whether you like him or not, is a good defensive coach, and he has enough talent to work with. They added Joey Bosa, and it's a boomer bust signing. I think there's more upside with this signing than there was for Jalen Ramsey with the Steelers, or there was for Jair Alexander with the Baltimore Ravens, and DeMarcus Lawrence too. If Joey Bosa could stay healthy, he will be a 10-plus sack type of guy for the Bills. But they're really turnover happy and aggressive before Joey Bosa. It's boring, I get it, but they're a good defense. You've got to trust me on this, someone who does fantasy defense specialization projects here. I know the Bills are going to be a good defense in fantasy again. Now, I personally love having defenses in the roster to make those decisions on a weekly basis, but I will say this, Underdog makes up for that with their chance of life-changing money. You get into one of these contests, you can literally win millions of dollars in 2025. Having fun doing it. So for me personally, it was well worth it last year when I won $19,000 playing Underdog Best Ball. And I think you should do the same and give yourself a shot and have a lot of fun doing it because it does not take up any of your time during the regular season. You do not have to make roster moves. There's no waiver wire. There's no trades. There's no setting your lineup. It's Best Ball. So to get in on it, you could go down in the comments. There's a link there to join. You can use code FFR. And they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus credits when you get in on one of these best ball drafts. So let me know what you think of the rankings at the defensive position in 2025. And if you want to see the top 30 running back rankings for 2025 fantasy football, click on this video right here.